at the monastery teaching.
Tell us about the North Korean refugee status throughout the world.
The vast majority of North Koreans who leave go to China, and the vast majority of those stay in China. Right now, we estimate that there are probably something over 300,000 North Koreans who have left North Korea over the last few decades. Something over 200,000 of them are in China. As you know, that in northeast China there is a Korean autonomous zone, Korean ethnic zone, and many people who leave North Korea make contact with ethnic Koreans in that area. If they're very fortunate, they make contact with extended families that will give them housing and food and support. Unfortunately, that isn't always the case, and people are taken advantage of. Over 70% of the people who leave North Korea are women, and they often are trafficked, forced into marriages, arranged marriages, forced into prostitution, and taken advantage of in a variety of ways. There are approximately 10,000 North Koreans in Russia, mostly people who have who were shipped out from North Korea to work in logging and mining in Russia, and have their jobs either finished or they escaped. So throughout Russia, mostly in the north and east, there are approximately 10,000 North Koreans there. There are North Koreans numbering in the hundreds in other different countries around the world. There are about 1,400 North Koreans living in Europe, hundreds in Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, and finally about 170 in the United States. I think it's important to realize how difficult it is, first of all, to leave North Korea. It's extraordinarily hard to escape detection and leave. It is against the law. It's considered treason to leave North Korea. And then once in China, North Koreans can be arrested by Chinese police and security forces and forced back to, forcibly returned to North Korea, where they may be subjected, the women who are pregnant may be subjected to forced abortions. Anyone can be subjected to torture and harsh interrogation, long prison terms, and even, in some cases, execution.
Is North Korean resettlement attainable in the U.S.?
Somehow, we made it possible for a large number of people to get from, East Africa to the Midwest, the United States. It shouldn't be that much more difficult to host North Koreans, especially those who find themselves in Southeast Asia, in Laos or Thailand or Cambodia, Vietnam, and in Mongolia. I think that it would be the right thing to do for the United States to communicate to those countries that North Koreans who want to come to the United States have automatic political asylum, and we will provide them with social services they need to settle in for a period of months. It's my understanding that if you are a North Korean who escapes from North Korea, and you reach a country in Southeast Asia, say Laos, if your intent is to go to South Korea, as is the intent with most North Koreans, your waiting period to be released from custody in Laos and allowed to emigrate to South Korea would be a matter of 2 or 3 months. But if your intent is to come to the United States, then your waiting period may be as long as 2 or 3 years. I'm not sure why this is happening. It's not right. It wasn't the intent of the North Korea Human Rights Act, which was passed by Congress in 2004, and was meant to make it easy for North Koreans to resettle in the United States. I have heard many North Koreans testify to being in custody in Thailand or Laos, and having very, very crowded and unsanitary conditions with poor food. Even those North Koreans who were held for only 2 or 3 months found it to be a very, very difficult experience. So I can only imagine what it must be like to be there for 2 or 3 years. Now we have only resettled 170 North Koreans in the United States. I don't know what the problem is. I would like to ask our State Department, our elected representatives, why isn't the intent of the North Korea Human Rights Act being followed? Why aren't we doing everything that we can? Those embassies and consulates around the world, why aren't U.S. representatives doing everything they can to make it easier for North Koreans to come to the United States? Given the situation in North Korea, and given the intent of the North Korea Human Rights Act here, I think that it is incumbent upon us to get as many North Koreans resettled in the United States as want to come here. Taking the Somali experience here in Minnesota, it began with people approaching their churches, usually Lutheran churches, and expressing their willingness to sponsor a family coming from Somalia. As more people came, it became a routine for Lutheran social services to provide food, housing, entree into whatever was needed to provide entree into American society to ease that transition. I would hope that we could do the same thing with North Koreans, and so I would encourage people to approach whatever institution they're a part of. If people belong to a church, approaching that church or that diocese and say, we would like to sponsor North Koreans. We understand that the situation in North Korea is horrendous, both in terms of food insecurity and in terms of human rights. We understand that there are North Koreans in Southeast Asia and in Mongolia, perhaps in South Korea, who would like to come to the United States. We would like to make it possible for them to come. And if that means that they need to stay with us for a while, that would be fine. If you are part of an institution of higher learning, you could ask the administration of that university or college to invite North Koreans who are in these countries and who would like to be students or have the capacity to teach, to come to your institution. Whatever institution you're a part of, I would suggest that people explore the possibility of bringing North Koreans here. I know that in the 70s and 80s, large numbers of Chinese students came to the United States, went to universities and graduate schools, returned to China to become provincial and regional officials, government officials, and I feel that made a great contribution to the liberalization of China, to more respect for human rights in China. I'd like to see the same thing happen with North Koreans, even if the North Koreans who come here are from Pyongyang and from the elite groups in society. I think that in the long run would make a huge difference in North Korea.
And what does human rights mean for you?
Human rights means to me that a government respects the integrity of the individual person, of the individual citizen in that country. That that integrity of person, that right to be alive, to not be damaged or harmed by your government, either directly through torture or indirectly through decisions that feed one part of the population and deny food to another part of the population. When governments decide to act in their own interests, in the interests of the government or the governors or the elected officials, as opposed to the interests of the people in the country, then human rights are being violated. And when a government makes a decision to act in the best interests of people and to protect their physical integrity and promote their well-being, then human rights are being respected by that government. Fortunately, we have seen many governments that have, over the last 40 years, that have changed from routine violations in the human rights of their citizens to more respect for human rights. That doesn't mean that, there are still, of course, vast and grievous violations and abuses of people's human rights. But the idea, the ethic of human rights has asserted itself around the world to the extent that governments have to pay attention